this morning is read from the 20th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so on. In the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Now he is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. This is the gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. So my 2 grandchildren are just now getting to that age where they're starting to ask big questions. The youngest one apparently saw a very, very pregnant woman the other day and said, Mom, did she eat that baby? The older one at 4.5 is even getting a little bit more dangerous. She's starting to apply logic to her questions. So she asked this, so if I have 2 eyes, why is it I only see one thing? That same grandchild came home from her Montessori school a few days ago, and at the dinner table she blessed her parents with her very first cuss word. When she was lovingly told by her very startled parents that we don't use that kind of language in our house, she applied her newfound logic to ask this question. So why is it that bad words get invented if we can't say them? It's a great question, huh? According to a recent study, kids ask 73 questions a day on average. And I tell you, every time I go to babysit my grandkids, I get all 73 of them. Last time I was there, my granddaughter, the older one, asked me this. She said, Papa, who will I live with when my mom and dad die? Big questions. Jesus himself was asked some pretty big questions. How many times should I forgive somebody if they sin against me? Should I pay taxes? Or should I not pay taxes? Jesus, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? Those are some pretty big questions. But he was also asked some odd questions, and maybe the oddest one of all was the one that he asked in today's gospel story. Whose wife will she be? Now the whole convoluted question went like this, and you kind of have to stick with me for a second because this is convoluted. They said, suppose there were 7 brothers. The oldest one got married, but he died before having a child. According to Deuteronomic law, Jesus, the next oldest brother has to marry the widow and make sure that she has a child to carry on the family name, right? But what if the same thing happens to the second brother, and the third, and the fourth, and so on, to each of the brothers until all 7 are dead, and none of them had children with her? So here's the big question, Jesus. When she dies and goes to heaven, whose wife will she be? The first husband, the second one, the third one? Will she be the husband to all of them? Now maybe we could cut the Sadducees some slack if they had asked that question out of all sincerity, or if they really, truly wanted to know something about heaven. But remember, the Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection, so their question was hardly sincere. They were trying to back Jesus into a corner. They didn't believe in heaven. They didn't believe in life, that when life on earth ended, that there was anything beyond that. There was no resurrection. There was no afterlife. There was no existence whatsoever when you die. Now, these Sadducees were some of the wealthiest people in society. They were politically connected. They were insiders. And according to the historian Josephus, they loved to argue just because they loved to argue. Their very name came from an ancient Hebrew word that means righteous, and they believed they were all of that. They were passionate about being right all the time. They were passionate about not letting anyone else look better than them. They were passionate about not letting anyone change the way things are supposed to be. Their entire set of beliefs came from the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the books of Moses. Anybody who believed that there was truth outside of those 5 books of Moses, they just simply were wrong. And the Sadducees believed it was their duty to publicly put those people to shame. So here comes Jesus walking into their midst one day, talking about life beyond death. So it was their obligation, they felt, to challenge him with this absurd question about resurrection, because they were sure, they were positive that their beloved books of Moses said nothing about resurrection. The question was based on one verse in the book of Deuteronomy, a very difficult verse, Deuteronomy 25, verse 6, which says this: when brothers reside together, and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased brother shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall take her in marriage and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. Crazy law, huh? And that certainly makes no sense to us today, but that's the way it was back then. That was Deuteronomic law, and the Sadducees knew it. So Jesus responded by using against them one of the most beloved stories from their own Torah. He said, remember the story of Moses and the burning bush? In that story, God said he was the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Right, Sadducees? Oh, yeah, right. That's what he said. But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all dead, Jesus said. According to your Torah, God can't be the God of the dead, but right there, also in the Torah, it says that God is the God of these people. So, if God can't be God of the dead, but somehow God is the God of these dead, then doesn't that mean that these dead people must not be dead after all, but they must be alive, which can only mean one thing, Sadducees: there has to be life after death, right? I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. He trapped them with impeccable logic that even my granddaughter wouldn't have applauded. Now, today's gospel reading stops at verse 38, but let me read to you the very next 2 verses that read this story about the Sadducees' encounter with Jesus. The very next 2 verses go like this. Some of them responded, "Well said, teacher," and no one dared ask him any more questions. Big questions. We continue to ask big questions today. Over the years, I've been asked some very big ones. Pastor, when a baby dies, will he or she be a baby in heaven? When someone dies at an old age, will that person be old in heaven? If not, then what age will any of them be? What age will we be? What age will I be when I die? Now, if you've wondered that yourself and you've gotten stumped on that one, you're not alone. One of the greatest and most important and influential figures in all of Christianity was St. Augustine. St. Augustine himself struggled with this, and he struggled and struggled and struggled until finally he said, I have an answer to the question. His answer was that everyone will be exactly 33 years old in heaven. And honestly, that sounds pretty good to me. And he said the reason is that's how old Jesus was when he was resurrected himself. also been asked if we will recognize each other in heaven. Will I be a parent in heaven, or will I be a child of my parents? I personally want to know if my grouchy childhood neighbor, Mr. Kramlich, is going to be there, and will he finally be nice? Will I bring my memories to heaven, or will I lose my memories? Not long ago, an 87-year-old woman asked me this in all sincerity. She'd been getting closer to the end of her life. She'd been thinking about these things, and it was really bothering her at night. So she came and asked me one day. She told me about being married, and her first husband died very tragically at the age of 27. So she got married again, and they had a very long and happy marriage until her second husband died at the age of 81. So she said, well, very much like the Sadducees' question, she said, will I be married in heaven? To which one? Will I be married to a 27-year-old husband, or will I be married to an 81-year-old husband, if either one? And she said, Pastor, I really wish I had the answers to those questions. It really troubles me. And I would say, wouldn't it be great if we all had answers to those questions, to the intricate details of all the nitty-gritties of what eternal life would be like? Well, the Sadducees really didn't want an answer to their question, but Jesus gave an answer that he might give us today. And it's a difficult one. He said, marriage is something for this life, and we shouldn't concern ourselves about it in the next. Things will be different then, and people will be different in heaven. We'll be like angels in heaven, he said. We'll be like children of the resurrection, he said. Now, to tell you the truth, I don't even know what that means, because my wife would tell you I've never been an angel, and I don't think, as far as I know, that I've ever talked to an angel. And I have no idea what a child of the resurrection even is like. So those are big mysteries to me, but I do know this. Jesus said that God's people won't ever die again. And that I can at least begin to wrap my head around. He also said, God is not God of the dead, but God is God of the alive, of those who are alive. And he also went on to say that to God, all are alive. Which means that whether I live or whether I die, I'm going to be alive. And that's all I need to know, and that's what the good news is to me. What it'll be like to be alive after death, I have no idea. They never gave us in seminary that big coffee table book, you know, that has all the pictures of heaven so you can open it. Oh, that's what it looks like. We never got that. I wish I had that. We never did get that. But I do have this. I have the promise that God is a God of abundant grace and love. And that being the case, I know that God is going to have something very special in store for me when my time comes to pass from this life to the next. And I also personally have an unshakable belief that I will see and know my loved ones in heaven, and that I will be reunited with them, and that's something I very, very much look forward to. Until then, there are many big questions, and there's lots of mystery, and those are going to always be a part of my faith life. One of the greatest theological statements of all time, one that, at least of those that I've heard, came from, you ready for this? Archie Bunker. Now you remember Archie Bunker, if you ever watched the 70s sitcom, All in the Family. He was that ornery, opinionated, and highly bigoted man who was sure that he possessed the sole truth on every topic, and he was more than eager to share it anywhere and everywhere. Now, to refresh your memory, Archie had a wife named Edith. They had an adult daughter named Gloria, and she married a man named Michael Stivic, who Archie called Meathead. Yes. So shortly after Gloria and Meathead were married, they had a little boy named Joey. And it wasn't long after Joey was born that Archie brought up the subject of baptism. You have to get my grandson baptized. Now remember, this is coming from Archie. But because the baby's father, Michael Stivic, Meathead, was an avowed atheist, There's no way that baby was going to be baptized. So one day, what does Archie Bunker do? He was asked to babysit little Joey, and he's thinking, So he decides to take the baby out and secretly get the baby baptized. And don't tell me that some of you grandparents haven't thought about that. We went from church to church and pastor to pastor, and each time he asked if they would baptize the baby, but the pastors and priests said, oh, no, I can't do that because you're not the baby's father. And finally, at the end of a long day, a very discouraged Grandpa Archie is walking out of a church after being told yet again that the baby can't be baptized. And Archie just so happens to be walking by a baptismal font in the church. It's sitting right next to a beautiful stained glass window. Archie stops and he looks at the stained glass window with the picture of Jesus on it. He looks at the baptismal font. He looks at his grandson Joey. He looks back at the baptismal font. He takes the cover off the font and he dips his hand into the water of the baptismal font. He pours water over his grandson's head and he says something like this. God, I don't know the words to use, but I know that you know. And with that, the screen faded to black and the show ended. As I said, it's one of the most profound theological statements that I've ever heard, with Archie Bunker as the theologian, nonetheless. Totally. As the years go by, I more and more appreciate and embrace that one piece of Archie Bunker theology, his simple prayer, God, I don't know, but I know that you know. And that about says it all. Today we're reminded that hope doesn't come from knowing whose wife or husband someone will be. Hope doesn't come from knowing all the details about heaven. Hope doesn't come from knowing anything at all other than knowing Jesus and trusting God, who is far more generous and loving and compassionate than we will ever be able to imagine.